Good day and welcome back to another episode of the Air Force podcast. My name is Yaku and today we've got Kimeshan Naidoo with us. Welcome you and thanks a lot for your time.
Great to be here, Yaku.
Kimeshan, we talked just before the recording about you being into the tech industry, you're a tech entrepreneur, and we've talked about the first company, BX, and what they do is they work with climate change and with soil. Would you please tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm the CTO at BX, and as you mentioned, we're a climate tech company, but we're very focused on farmers. And but what I mean by that is we're helping farmers to reduce the carbon um, that it takes to produce crops. So, firstly, we're able to measure the carbon per kilogram of apples, for example, that's produced on a farm, say in the Western Cape, and we then help the farm to implement regenerative practices so that they are able to produce both better crops for the environment, but also healthier crops for you and I. And then ultimately, though, we help farmers to make more money by being more sustainable. So um, they can actually then sell that carbon reduction as a verified insured carbon credit to the food supply chain and the retailers like Woolworths or Tesco in the UK or Walmart in the US who are looking to reduce their carbon footprint and their emissions at different scopes.
Okay. And how does that process work to reduce the carbon and to take the carbon out of the soil? What is the process of that?
So carbon is sequestered in soil. So this literally means that if you took a soil sample and you send it to a lab, you will measure a percentage of carbon in it, so the element C, along with other things like nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus that's in the soil as well. But the key here is that you can actually sequester a lot more carbon, and I mean, the difference can be 5x or 10x if the soil is healthier. So the healthier your soil is, the more carbon you sequester, and that's how you can reduce your net carbon quite massively. And it means that it's healthier soil and it's a healthier crop for the consumer as well.
Okay. And then how do you determine like what kind of soil is healthier or is better or is worse for the carbon and for the crop as well?
Yeah, so the key is measuring it. So
Mm.
most farmers do soil samples or soil analysis. So they will, actually take a sample of soil from each field, send this to the lab, and get back the results to see how healthy their soil is. This is usually used to inform them about what fertilizers to use and what chemicals they need to add to the soil to get the balance right. But that misses the point in terms of the environmentals. So we're actually trying to say, we need your soil analysis data, and yes, we ingest that in, and it's on our platform, and you could see your carbon in the soil, and then we focus on what are the action items that they can implement to reduce, or rather increase the carbon in the soil, which reduces their net carbon on the farm. So things you can do to improve soil quality are practices like cover cropping, practices like mulching. So different things that you can actually do on the farm to improve the soil quality. Obviously, using less chemicals and fertilizers, which tend to smash the soil, will also improve the soil quality as well. So there's a lot of different practices, and there's a whole science around it, which is called regenerative agriculture. And we do have people on our team. We have a regenerative agriculture specialist. We have an environmental scientist that are essentially coming up with these plans that we implement on the platform, and that farmers are then able to put in place to reduce their carbon footprint.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, you have to put in more carbon into the soil. Is that what you're doing? Take it out of the air.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
correct?
So there's
Okay.
literally carbon that's coming out of the air or the atmosphere and being sequestered into the soil, and it stays there. So it reduces the carbon that actually is emitted and contributes to global warming and that layer of carbon in the atmosphere.
Okay. And then the carbon in the soil then, does it hold in any benefits for the crops and for the plants, or how does that work?
Yeah. So usually, the higher the carbon in the soil, the healthier it is. So you
Mm.
want different elements, different nutrients in the soil, because what essentially you put into a crop, the soil that it grows in will heavily affect the output and the nutrients in your fruit and vegetables. We know that the food that we've been eating as a human population in the last few decades is definitely affecting our health. And you see in a lot of developed countries where the rates of cancer is the highest it's ever been, for example. So there's a lot of potential causes of this, but one of the potential causes is really poor soil health, and just the the fact that we're often in a way forcing farmers to just smash their soil with a lot of chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, which is not good for the soil, and it's not good for us and the food that we eventually put in our body as well.
Okay. And you mentioned regenerative farming. What exactly is that?
So I would say regenerative farming is all about how you can regenerate the nutrients and the quality in the soil. So it's about reversing the trend where we've destroyed the quality of a large percentage of topsoil around the world. I think there's a lot of people that have spoken about this. The UN has spoken about it. There's a lot of people in agriculture and even people outside of agriculture that have spoken about this crisis. So it's all about farming practices that can be used to to go back to, in a way, to a healthier way of farming, and a sustainable way of farming, so that the soil quality and the topsoil is going back to the way perhaps it was 100 years ago, when there were a lot more nutrients in it. And the great thing is we can reverse it. So it's not like we've destroyed the soil; it's destroyed forever. Through using regenerative practices, we can reverse that damage and get back that soil quality and get much higher quality of crops as well.
Okay. And then how did you get into I would say, the climate change effect and the regenerative effect? And I would almost want to say the reuse, that kind of process in life. How did you get into that?
Sure. So I would say, so firstly, I'm the co-founder of Unibuddy, which is the
Mm.
company I've worked on for a long time before this, and I'm currently on the board, but no longer involved in the day to day because the team is quite big. Unibuddy is an ed tech company, and we help students. So I co-founded that in 2016, and essentially, at the beginning of this year, I was looking to solve a new problem because it's been 7 years, and I'd grown Unibuddy a lot, and I felt like I just had an itch to solve a new problem. And I think ultimately, for my personal motivation, what I really enjoy looking at is what I call the billion people problems. So, what are the problems that affect more than a billion people out there? Um, that was my initial reason for founding Unibuddy, because education is one of those billion people problems. And I think the other two is health, and health tech and healthcare, because that affects everyone. But the third one is climate,
Mm.
and climate tech and the environment. And out of those three problems, I realize, and like a lot of people have realized, climate's the most urgent one. It's the one that has the real kind of ticking. It's the one that's the real ticking time bomb. And that's why I was really interested in the space. So when I was looking for new problems to solve, I was looking at startups and problems in that space. And then I really loved what BX is doing, because if you really look at emissions, everyone's talking about electric cars. For example, what Tesla is doing, and that's all really great. But transport is only 5% of emissions.
Mm. Yeah.
So even if we all started driving electric cars, the biggest impact we're going to have is 5% or to 10% maximum. Whatever the exact figure is. But agriculture is closer to 40% of emissions. So it's nearly half the problem because we all eat, we all need food, and it affects every single person on the planet. So I think solving the climate problem essentially equates to solving agriculture and making agriculture climate friendly.
Okay. And then, do you have a passion as well for agriculture and for farming and that industry?
So I don't have any background in agriculture,
Mm.
and I didn't and I haven't worked in agriculture before, so it's completely new industry for me as well as climate tech. What I am passionate about and where my experience is in solving problems and particularly building software and technology products to solve these problems. So at UniBuddy, with my team, we built a SaaS platform for universities and a an app for students essentially that helps students to choose a university when they were in high school by allowing them to chat with current students in university. And at BX, we're building an app and a platform for farmers, and also for retailers and other end of the supply chain to solve this problem. So no, I actually have no no background in farming or agriculture. It's been a really exciting journey to learn about the climate tech industry, about agriculture, meeting with farmers. When I joined in January, we traveled to South Africa. We um, you know visited apple pear farms in the Western Capes. Big farmers like Detroit, smaller farmers like um, True Fruit, etc. And we also went to Washington State in the U.S., which is one of the biggest apple producing regions in the world, and uh, I'm pretty sure the biggest in the U.S. And visited apple farms there, as well as hops farms as well. And it was really interesting just being on the ground, walking through the field with the farmers and learning about their problems and learning how they work, and seeing the scale of the problem. So it's been a lot of learning in the past 6 to 8 months. But the easiest way to learn is just to get out there and actually speak to the customer and speak to the farmer, get on the field and kind of get into the trenches and understand their problems. And then you can build a product that is really able to solve a problem for them.
And how difficult is it to outside to persuade people to change their current way of doing things into outside a new way and to your way of doing the things?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that the probably the most common answer to that is it's tough because people don't like change.
Mm.
And that is partially true, but I would say change can be driven by different things. So there needs to be a motivation for people to change. It can either be that they need to be more profitable or they need to make more money. So if you bring a solution that allows someone to make more money as a business or as a person, they will be open to change. Um, it can be a problem that you're solving that's a real big pain point for them. So the kind of quote about build painkillers, not vitamins. Most people probably forget to take their vitamins, but if you're in pain, you don't forget to take a painkiller. So if you have a really, really big problem that a product is solving for you, you're likely gonna change and use that product because it's a really painful problem. Um, the third driver of this is demand from your customers or who you're selling to, and potentially regulatory changes as well. So I think in climate, what we're seeing is that farmers are not the first people to want to change. Definitely, they definitely prefer doing things in the way they've always done them. Um, but the thing that's driving the change is that they know they need to sell their apples, right? They need to be able to sell their apples to Woolworths or Walmart. And if Woolworths or Walmart is saying that, hey, we need you to have good environmentals and we need you to reduce your carbon for us to buy your apples because our consumers want apples that are better for the environment, then the farmers have a lot of motivation to do that, right? Because otherwise they're not going to sell their apples. So I think that's what we're seeing now. That it's almost a forced requirement, I would say, that all farmers in the world are going to have to become more sustainable, and they're going to have to reduce their carbon if they want to keep selling to consumers, because the supply chain is starting to demand this. But we need to help farmers because they don't make a lot of money, and their margins are already still tight. So we need to help them to actually make money to transition, and to be more environmentally sustainable. And this is what we're doing, in essence. But I think the change right now, it's definitely being driven by the by the consumer and the retailer, and then also regulatory changes coming. So governments around the world are drafting laws that are trying to accelerate this decarbonization, and just helping to solve this massive generational problem that we have, which we call climate change.
And now you mentioned a lot of regulations coming into place. What is the regulations, and how do they, I would say, motivate people to be more carbon friendly?
So I think it depends if you're looking at a general level. I mean, I think there's standard stuff out there that governments have been doing for a long time to incentivize individuals to reduce their carbon footprint. So we know, for example, a lot of countries have benefits and for example, tax benefits if you drive an electric car versus the normal car. Um, some countries, including South Africa recently, for example, which have now are incentivizing people to use solar, for example, and are trying to offer rebates on that. And I think we can do a lot more there as well, and implement that better. But it's a good start. So I think things in the form of that happen, but in agriculture, um, I would say there needs to probably be a bigger drive and a bigger push, to get this done quickly. There still isn't enough transparency of verified data. So I would say the first thing is that, even though the retailers, so the supermarkets do have reporting requirements right now, so they do have to report their emissions, um, uh, that that is in their supply chain. Um, I would say a lot of the data in this emissions reporting is not verified, and is potentially not accurate. So I think that's where we need a lot more. I mean, it's not regular. I don't like calling it regulation in a way, because it sometimes feels like a bad word. I think we need more standards, and we need proper scientific reporting of emissions data, in the food supply chain, so that we know exactly what's going on and how to reduce it.
Okay, so do you think currently there isn't enough scientific data to support the regulations that people want to put in place, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I would say in for the for the food supply system, there isn't enough verifiable data. So I think, for example, in the carbon accounting tools that a lot of farms or retailers can use, the figures that are input into these tools, they're not actually audited, in a thorough way. So you could put in a figure that's not accurate, or it's an estimation, and the standard. If you're looking at how we do financial accounting, for public companies or private companies in a lot of countries, like your financials are audited by a third party, and that's a requirement. And you often have auditors like will go into a business and count the stock of items to verify that it matches what's in the books. So I would say that level of verifiability, and that level of auditing is not there, um, in terms of carbon accounting. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest growing fields in the next few decades. Is carbon accounting may end up being as thoroughly auditable and, as big a industry in a way as like financial accounting. And you will need auditors, and we're probably going to need technology to do this more automatically because
Mm.
it's a huge task. We're not going to be able to manually verify the carbon in every business in the world. But people are trying to solve these problems in different ways in different industries. There are definitely companies working on better carbon accounting tools. We're not working on that. Um, but there isn't one that we find that's out there for farms right now that's really good and verifiable.
Okay. And how do you think that this problem should be addressed and the problem should be solved actually?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think I think in one way it does have to come top down. So there do needs to be
Okay.
a regulation from government that start to mandate this auditing and verifiability because that's
Mm.
why we have it in financial accounting, for example. Auditing the auditing requirement is a company law. It's a part of a company law in most countries at least. So I think that it does need to come top down to accelerate it, because otherwise, why would a farm or anyone in the food supply chain actually pay to have their carbon data audited if they don't need to? It's just easier to go for the estimation or the potentially low accuracy data. So there needs to be incentives. In other words, there needs to be regulation, or they need to get paid for it. And I think that's the other way to solve it is that you say, hey, if you have accurate data, for example, you can actually sell this as a carbon credit, and make money from it, and that incentivizes farmers to then have that accurate data. So I think that's the approach we're taking. That's how we're incentivizing it and driving this change. But the yeah, ultimately, I think it does need to become a regulatory change, and we need to have standards, and we need to have verifiable, auditable carbon accounting data.
Okay. And then how do you stay up to date with the latest trends in the technology, especially in your field then?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer by background. I still love building products, and I still work on the product every day at BX. I have a small engineering team right now, so we're very hands on. For me, I find Twitter to be, or now X, to be a really really good platform for keeping up with the latest things. There's a lot of engineers, software engineers, entrepreneurs that are building in public. I think the hashtag build in public is really cool. So that's where people are basically sharing how they're building things, what tech they're using. Super interesting in AI right now. So what APIs people are using, things like LangChain, Llama Index, how they're using it, how they're kind of hacking things and playing around and tweaking to get things to work better, to build these new AI applications. So I think following the right people on platforms like X is really useful. YouTube as well, people with some really cool channels that are constantly putting out good quality content about new tech, new approaches to doing things, new approaches to building companies as well. So those are probably the biggest two I use right now. I do find I've used less text content recently. I used to read a lot more books and blog posts, but I feel like right now it's just there's a lot of video content out there. There's a lot of video content, YouTube, podcast, of course, that has exploded in the last few years as well. So I find like yes, video and audio content to keep up with the latest trends is my general go-to.
Okay. And what would you say is the most crucial skills that you need to succeed in your kind of industry?
Sorry, in which industry?
More into the tech, I would say more into the tech industry to stay up to date with the trends, or the skills you need to, especially the understanding and implementing of it.
Yeah, so I think firstly in tech, it's I think it's a misconception that the hard problem is building the product. I would
Mm.
say most companies fail because they don't build something that people want, and they haven't validated their problem and validated the solution that they're building properly. So I think before we talk about implementing tech, the critical thing, the critical skill to have as an entrepreneur, or whether you're a tech entrepreneur or you're non-technical, is how do I build something that people want, and how do I validate that? How do I talk to customers? How do I really understand their problem and their pain point? and then it's a slightly different skill, but how do I come up with a really good solution that people will want to use? So I think those two skills itself can take a long time to learn. But if I had to pick the two most important ones, it's yes, it's building something that people want, which involves those sub skills of identifying the problem and being able to design a good solution for it. In terms of
Okay.
implementing the tech, I think it's really important to be able to start simple and iterate quickly. The mantra I use, and a lot of people who build in public talk about it, but um, you almost want to ship before you're ready.
Mm,
So, ship the product with the minimal features it needs for you to get useful feedback. And don't wait too long. So, a lot of people spend months or even years trying to build this perfect product or perfect app. And by the time they ship it, they've invested a lot of resources, time, and money into it with no feedback from the users. And it often fails because of that as well. So
mm,
a very kind of, what we say is the opposite of agile. In a sense, it's waterfall, where you take a long time to do each step, versus I think when you ship quickly and make small changes and improve it quickly, it just you are more agile and you can change quickly as well based on the user feedback. Because you might ship version one, it turns out nobody likes it, but they tell you what they would want, and then you build version two. That's actually completely different, and you can make this
mm.
change quickly because you haven't invested so much in version one. So
Okay.
I like to say an MVP, that first version, you shouldn't take more than 3 to 6 weeks to build and ship it. I think if you're taking longer than 6 weeks for an MVP, there may be some exceptions here, but most of the time, if you're taking longer than 6 weeks, you're probably overbuilding or over engineering it.
Okay. And how do you foster that kind of creativity and innovation, especially in your team and the people that you work with?
So how do we promote innovation and
Yes,
creativity?
definitely.
So I think the key thing with getting people to innovate is giving them the space to do that and
Mm,
giving them the autonomy to do that. So in the beginning, when you have a startup, I would say you want everyone to be very close to the problem and to care about the problem. And if everyone is close to the problem, you'll often find that innovation happens because people will be coming up with solutions. Even your engineers will be able to improve the product on their own without like having someone from the business tell them it, because they're really able to understand what you're doing. So I think one is exposing everyone to the problem and the customer, and two is allowing people that space and autonomy. So giving people that ownership, like, hey, it's your job to also innovate and be creative. Don't just wait to be told what features to build or what to do. So I think and there's a lot of books written about this, but um innovation and creativity is strongly linked to culture. So it's all about creating the culture to do that. One of my favorite books about culture is called The Culture Code. I can't remember the author, but if you Google it, you'll find it. And I think that's a great book about what are the types of culture that will lead to innovation and high performing teams.
okay. I think uh, how important is it to build good connections and to network good, especially with customers, clients, and people busy with the regulating of all of your things? How important is that networking?
I would say very industry dependent. So if you're a B2C and you're selling straight to consumers, I think it's less important because that's more about how do you reach a lot of people, and can you build a really good marketing machine, and or maybe you're already a kind of influencer and you have reach. But I think B2C businesses is where I haven't worked in those, and and that's not where my experience is. So I've tended with Unibuddy and BX, it's been building products for companies. So it's been B2B. And in the B2B space, it is often important to be a trusted voice in that industry. So at Unibuddy, we are well known by universities. We went to conferences that universities went to, and we were known as, and we are known as experts in the higher education industry when it comes to solving this problem. And at BX, it's important as well. Farmers, they need to trust us. They need to know that we're experts in regen, in environmental science, and that we're going to the places that they're going to, and that we really understand their problem. So I think if you're building a B2B business, it's really important to build that trust and credibility in that niche industry that you're in, because it's much more sales driven in that way versus like just someone on the street kind of downloading your app, in a B2B way, in a B2C way.
Okay. And then, how do you manage I would say, the intellectual property and the patenting of some of the products that you have? Because I know there's some regulations, but don't know the background and the I would say the crucial parts of that. How do you work with that?
I would say with software, patents are usually quite difficult,
Mm.
and companies that have patents, or startups that have patents, it's often for hardware. So if you build something physical, it's a lot easier to patent it. Software can be tricky to patent. A lot of countries, they don't allow, for example, certain types of code or pieces of code to be patented. But what you do automatically have is copyright. So when code is written in your company, you automatically own the copyright to that. And I don't think software, in terms of general purpose apps and software, is a good moat. I think good moats in terms of what are the things that can protect your business, is often now around AI. So if you're doing something very bespoke, if you have an interesting algorithm, or you're applying AI in a very interesting way, that's where you can potentially look at patents, and further protections. But I would say, yeah, in 8 years at Unibuddy and BX, never filed a patent once, because we never built any hardware, and software is quite, is a bit tricky, and a bit more expensive to patent. But it's not a field I'm an expert in as well, so it will be great to actually have someone perhaps do a podcast on that area one day.
Okay. And then, AI, you've mentioned AI a few times now. How has AI changed your industry? How has AI been a helpful tool for you, and how do you use AI to, I would say, to get the best results?
Yeah, so I think it's already had a dramatic change in my industry, both from how we build products to what capability products can have, right? So I'd say the first one and the easiest one, and probably the one that every single engineering team can start doing today, is how we build products. And using LLMs like ChatGPT or Bard, um, you can generate a lot of code um, on these systems. So I know that my engineering teams are probably using ChatGPT every day to generate certain pieces of code, to write tests, to debug. So as engineers, we're able to be a lot more productive, and we're able to build products a lot more faster with AI. So that's the first part. I do also think AI is going to replace a lot of junior engineering jobs in the future. So I think, actually, ironically, in a way, software engineers are going to be one of the first to be replaced by AI, and probably a lot of people didn't see that coming. I do think it'll take a bit longer to replace senior engineers and architects, because that architectural knowledge of building systems is still important. But writing general purpose code, is ChatGPT, for example, is very, very good at that, and you can argue much better than most junior engineers out there. In terms of product capability, so I'd say a lot of companies are behind on this, but it's very, very easy to integrate AI into your existing products and apps right now. So the infrastructure out there, the APIs out there, the frameworks out there, you can easily, for example, convert your data source into a vector store. And what we mean by vector store is just it's stored in a format where we can now query it through language. So essentially, your customers or you as a business, you can chat to your data in your database, which ChatGPT doesn't have access to. But I think every company probably will benefit from that, being able to use natural language to chat to their database. So I feel like, yeah, what's just exploded and improved by leaps and bounds in the last 12 to 18 months is the ecosystem of AI models and how quickly it is to pull it into your product, because the APIs and libraries out there, they've really matured. They're very cheap. They're just a few cents for thousands of calls. And I feel like it's actually every company should already have it in their product, but it's probably the lack of engineering talent right now, or the lack of know-how, that's the reason why it isn't there yet. Um, I think it's very easy to hook up proprietary data to a queryable kind of system, where you can actually chat to the data using English and provide really useful insights and suggestions in your app for your users. That that's it's happening quickly, but for me, it's not happening quickly enough. I think there's a lot of value that is that is on the table that's not fully taken on board yet.
And then when you are using AI, there's obviously some kind of ethical things that you should consider, and um, data that cannot be breached. And also, if I'm correctly, the AI has a bit of subjectivity to it. Uh, how do you approach these issues, and um, how do you solve these kind of issues?
Yeah, so I think the key to owning your own data and protecting your customers' data is to obviously not put that data on a third party AI system. So don't feed that data into ChatGPT. Don't copy and paste that information into these public LLMs. What you do need to do is basically just build a private API, or just a general API as you normally would. And in that way, when you have a private API as a company, um, only you're able to control access to that, and that private API might have access to your data, but you limit the data it has, and you can segment the data as well. So a customer can only query its own data or have access to its own data, in terms of what insights and suggestions it's seeing, as well. So I don't think that's a big issue unless you're trying to use a public LLM like ChatGPT, and that's why a lot of companies have banned it, because they're worried employees are going to copy and paste private and customer data into the LLM. But what they really should be doing is developing their own private API that could use the LLM as um, one data source in a way, but they could be integrating their their their, their proprietary data into it, and have their customers use an internal system so that they don't have to go to a public LLM like ChatGPT and paste it in there. And that's where a lot of companies and a lot of big companies are missing the trick from what I see. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
No, I think you've answered that uh, question thoroughly. And
Sure.
another thing I saw is that you've helped a lot of people, a lot of startups, to become more successful and to reach their dreams and achieve their goals. What did you do? How did you start with that? Please tell me more about that and the background around that.
So I'm very passionate about building companies, and growing companies, and more importantly, about building amazing products. And what is the journey, and what are the things people should do to start building amazing, tech products and apps that can solve real problems for people, and make a difference. So I didn't go about it in any formal way, but a lot of people often come up to me, and they have an idea. They want to build an app or build a web application, or some kind of product, and that's where I'm really excited to kind of um, to help where I can, to be a mentor, to give advice, to review their designs, to review their code, to review their business plans, things like that. So I think it's just come up very ad hoc, and it's just been driven by people coming to me, and I've been helping where I can, and now I try to share the lessons I'm learning, and that I've learned in the past 7 or 8 years. Growing Unibuddy from the start to 120 team members, and helping over 3 million students on the platform. Just that journey from zero all the way to where we are today. There's been a ton of lessons, so in a way, I like to share them so people don't make the same mistakes as well, and can learn from these lessons. So yeah, I share them, across my social media, and I hope that's helping other startups out there as well.
Okay, and then how do you manage the risk and uncertainty, and how do you mitigate the risk for a startup to, because with a startup, there's obviously a lot of risks involved. You have to, probably a lot of people have to quit their jobs to start something or do it on the side or um, take a big financial, they need capital. So how do you mitigate those risks? Or how do you advise people to mitigate? I wouldn't say advise, but how do you help those risks and how do you manage it actually?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's tough to start a startup, especially if you have a stable job and to leave that. Um, I would say one way to do it is to incrementally spend more and more time in your startup. So, for example, if you have a full time job and you also want to start a company, you could start validating the idea and start maybe building the MVP on your weekends. um, Once you launch the MVP and you see that you're getting some traction, or you're now a bit more confident, that's where I think you start to think about, okay, how can I spend more time on this, and do I want to quit my job? But you probably also want to get some validation from investors and start to speak to some angels, for example, maybe some seed funds, and pitch to them. You're basically going to be like, look, here's my MVP, here's the traction I got, here's the usage so far, and I want to raise this money so that I can take the next step with this. So raising money is a great way to kind of de-risk, because it means someone else thinks your idea is good. I think the mistake that people use is they often put their own money into their company, um, which might sound like a like a natural thing to do, but it actually makes it riskier, because we always think our own idea is good. But I think you want to try to you always want to raise money from other people, because you want that validation that they think your idea is good, and that they feel that could be profitable, and and you should invest time in it. So I think de-risking is validating as much as you can before you take any personal risk. Raising money from third parties to further validate that you have backing, and your idea is viable. And the third is you need a personal runway. So focus on saving up to have a personal runway for. I think for a startup, you want to give yourself at least a year, but even that can be short. So I do think, if you're gonna make the leap and want to go into a startup full time and quit your job, you do need to have personal savings that will be enough for a year. Um, because it can often take that long or a bit longer before you are generating revenue, and you can start to like pay yourself, or you raise investments, and you can start to pay yourself and things like that. So I'd say, yeah, those three areas is what I'd focus on.
Okay. And then how do you get the correct people in your business? How do you employ the right people, people that with the right skills, that all of the things that is going to work for you and for your company?
Yeah. So employing the right people, it's always a tough problem. I think it's one of those unsolved problems. Nobody has perfectly solved it. The key thing is to define what is the bar that you have, and what is the quality of talent that you're looking for, and then to really stick to that. So I think as you know something that you always got to keep in mind is that A players will hire A players and B players will hire B players. So it's very important to keep the bar high. If you want to have a company of A players, you need to hire A players, because eventually they're going to be hiring people for you as well. So I think it can quickly become a spiral to the bottom if you start to lower that bar, and that can crush your culture as well. So the number one thing I feel is to keep in mind when hiring people is clearly define your bar. What is your values? What is your expectations of performance? And what is your culture? And then you look for people that are, absolutely going to be ambassadors of that, and meet your bar, or like smash that bar, and you bring them in, and good things will happen, and then you find that you can attract more people like that once you already have some people um, that are in that mold.
Okay, and then how do you manage your? I would actually say prioritize your time and I would say your work between all of the companies and both the companies that you have. How do you say, okay, today I'm going to focus more on this, or what is your approach?
Yeah, so I would say it's important to focus on one thing at a time,
Mhm.
and I'm not operational in more than one company, so I pretty much spend 100% of my time at BX right now. At Unibuddy, I'm on the board. That's very non-operational. It's a board meeting every quarter, every 3 months. So it takes a very very tiny fraction of my time. So I think building one business is hard enough, and you need to focus on it fully. So if you have multiple ideas, work on them one at a time. It's much better to try out an idea, reject it, and move on to the next one than trying to kind of work on five ideas but not fully implementing any of them, and not fully being able to reject or validate any of them.
Okay, and then the technology is changing every day. Every day there's something new out. There is something else, um, and I have asked how do you stay up to the trend, but how can you be on top of it? How can you be like always be that one step ahead of the current technology always have something better than what is currently out there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what I would point to is a really good tool to do this, which I've discovered and I've used quite a bit. It's a mapping strategy or mapping technique called Wardley maps.
Mhm.
So again, if any of your listeners, or if you want to Google Wardley maps, it essentially allows you to plot the landscape in your industry, or in the problem space that you're working in, or that your product is a part of. And what it enables you to do is see what is being on that spectrum from what is being commoditized. So in other words, what is what is really easy to build or buy off the shelf out there, and basically you don't really have a moat with it. So you don't want to build things that are commoditized, because commodities are basically differentiate themselves based on price. So if you're buying gold, gold bars are the same everywhere. So you basically go and buy it from the cheapest place. So you don't want to be fighting in that market.
Mm.
I think I think what you want to be doing is identifying the things in Wadley Maps that are on the other end of the spectrum, which is it's not possible to buy it off the shelf. You need to custom build it, or it's still in that phase where it doesn't even work well, and people are experimenting in this space, and it's kind of coming through that pipeline. And that's where you add the value, because nobody else can copy that. Nobody else can just buy that off the shelf and build it really quickly. So I think, yeah, you don't want to be building things that are commoditized. You don't want to be building things that you can buy off the shelf. You want to focus your energy on building things that that only you can offer, and your customers have to go to you for that value. An example of this is if you think of Uber. So Uber obviously needs GPS in the app, which requires satellites, but it would be a really bad strategy if Uber decided to invest in putting up their own satellites. Right? They could spend millions or tens of millions in putting up a satellite, but satellite data and GPS data is a commodity. Anyone can pull that into their app. There's a Google Maps API, etc. So what Uber actually does is they focus their effort in building a great user experience, and having a great pool of drivers, because that's what's ultimately going to differentiate them. Like, you want to use an app that's really quick to get a driver, and it's a really great user experience. And that's a lot harder to build. You can't really buy that. You can't buy a great user experience. You can't buy a network of drivers. You can buy satellite data and GPS. So that's just an extreme example, but it's the kind of thing that I think every business should understand. What are the things that are commoditized in their supply chain? If you think about it in that way, because even if you build an app, you have a supply chain. For example, GPS. That's part of it. And what are the things that are on the leading edge, and that require custom build, and that's where you should focus your effort, because that's what's gonna provide you with value and give you that moat.
Okay, and what does the future hold in for you? What is your next goal, your next uh, thing you want to achieve, your next box you want to tick off? What is your next thing?
So I'd say right now it's all about finding product to market fit at BX. So proving that the product works for farmers, and showing that we've reduced carbon on farms across the world, and that we've improved soil quality in a huge amount of acres or hectares of land around the world. It'll be really inspiring to say one day that we've increased the carbon sequestered in 1 million acres around the world, of farmland. So that's a very inspiring goal. And one day, what I'd love to say is we actually made a significant impact on climate change, and we reduced agriculture emissions by, even if it's 1%, that's a huge dent on the planet. So I think for me, what I find really inspiring is making a dent on the planet in a good way, and a long lasting impact. And my long term goal is is potentially after BX in a few years, is to I think I'll always build companies. So I will keep building my own companies, but definitely also looking back home and to solve a problem in South Africa. So I think we have a lot of problems to solve, which is exciting for entrepreneurs. Some people look at that negatively; they talk about the problem, but for me, as an entrepreneur, I think it's an exciting place to be, because you want problems to solve, and there's so many big problems, and there's so much of an impact that you can make in more developing countries like South Africa. So I think long term, I'd love to come back and solve a big problem, and make a big impact.
Okay, and how can people reach out to you? Maybe ask you to solve some of their problems. Where are you? How can people reach you?
Yeah, sure. So social media is probably the best. You can on X or Twitter. It's at Naidoo Notes. The same on Instagram. If you handle is Naidoo Notes. You can search me on LinkedIn, and you find me pretty easily as well. Um, Otherwise, Yeah, email as well is possible, but probably social media is the easiest and most scalable.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm going to stop the recording just now. So let me stop it and